Lichvod Rabbi Olitsky, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Today's Parsha, Yitro, has two parts. The second portion, obviously the giving of the Ten Commandments, but I'm going to speak about part one. As you know, any Judaic document is subject to conflicting opinion. Such is the case with this chapter of Shemot. For our purposes, I'm going to agree with Rambam that the events happened in the order written, with Ibn Ezra that the good pagan Yitro is placed here in contrast to the bad one, Amalek, and with the commentators who say Yitro converted to Judaism. We find his descendants in Israel in Shoftim and Shmuel Aleph. At the end of the last Parsha, the exhausted Israelites were attacked by Amalek, but with God's help won the battle. The events of the Exodus and the miracles were shocking and widely known among other nations. As a friend of mine said, the waters of the world split with the sea, and if you were drinking a scotch in Bradley Beach, that would have too. Others forgot the news and went on with life. There was one exception, the man of action for whom the Parsha is named, Yitro. As we'll hear at least 11 times, Yitro, who had several other names, is always Moshe's father-in-law. Moshe feels disconsolate with his awe and memory. Who will believe his story? Someone whose name he still doesn't know refuses to take no for an answer as he enlists him to liberate his people with whom he never lived from a hard-hearted Pharaoh using frogs and baby boys. Yitro is Moshe's person. He arrives at Moshe's camp with Moshe's wife Zipporah and sons Gershom and Eliezer. Moshe bows to Yitro. They proceed to Moshe's tent. If Moshe was happy to see his family, we don't know. Zipporah and the boys are never seen again. Most believe that Yitro's most important contribution to the Israelites was his advice to Moshe about how to set up a judicial system. As M.K. Benny Gantz says in his commentary on the Parsha, Yitro sets himself up as the world's first organizational consultant. To his credit, Moshe was willing to accept Yitro's advice. It's a bit surprising that this man who had direct access, panim el panim, to God, should have required advice from anyone else. Moshe did not have all the answers. If God knew, he didn't say. I believe that Yitro made more important and abiding contributions to Judaism. First, he, a Gentile, not the Israelites, blessed God for the first time. They were worrying about hunger and thirst. Yitro rejoiced over the kindness of God, that God had shown Israel in delivering them from the Egyptians, and gave this blessing. Blessed be God who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know, he said, that Hashem is greater than all the others, and he accepted their God as his. Professor Dave Falk points out that with this blessing, Yitro, the non-Jew, created the template for praise and thanksgiving that's been accepted in Jewish worship. By coming to listen to Moshe's telling of the events of the Exodus, Yitro precipitated the first recounting of the story, that which God has commanded us to repeat and repeat and repeat. And you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what Hashem did for me when I went free from Egypt. Yitro appeared when Moshe was alone and overwhelmed. In only one of two instances in the Torah, Yitro said, Lo tov hadabar asher ata asa. It's not good, the thing that you're doing. It's not right. The other place, you know where lo tov is used. It's not good for man to be alone, and so God gave Adam Eve. God said, it's lo tov, not good for man to be alone. Yitro had taken Moshe in and married his daughter Zipporah to him when he fled from Pharaoh after murdering the Egyptian. Moshe stayed and worked as a shepherd for 40 years. He carried a lot of baggage from his experience, not knowing his real father, having two mothers, and living in Pharaoh's palace, knowing he was an Israelite. He had ongoing identity issues. With Yitro and Zipporah, this was Moshe's first and only experience living in a normal family. After the burning bush, Moshe left Midian and returned to Egypt, worried that the people he was to lead would not listen to him. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes of Moshe's lowest point in Bamidbar, when the people are gathering to move on and begin complaining about the manna, how they miss the food in Egypt and crave meat. Moshe said to God, "The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you're going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I've found favor in your eyes, do not let me face my own ruin." God replies immediately that Moshe should appoint 70 elders to share the burden of leadership with him, to break the isolation and despair. Just as Yitro prescribed the addition of men as judges for the tens, 50s, and hundreds, this provided many people so Moshe would not be alone. What's the message of the two lo tovs? Being and doing things alone is not good. Dr. Vivek Murthy, former Surgeon General of the US, declared an epidemic of loneliness. Though these feelings were exacerbated by COVID, the problem had begun well before. In a 2019 survey, 58% of Americans said they often felt like no one in their life knew them well. The British appointed a minister of loneliness. Researchers coined a helpful phrase for understanding. Isolation is being by yourself. Loneliness is not liking it. Yitro and later God see the problem that most interferes with Moshe's service as loneliness. He has other problems and disappointments, but being alone is almost his undoing. In loneliness studies, many respondents report they can go for days without talking to or hearing anyone speak to them. Let us, in this amazing community, be tov and say one word to remind people they're not invisible. At this very difficult time in our existence, when we feel a need for armed guards to protect us, let us not forget that not every non-Jew hates us. Let us not forget the past, but be open to support and to learning from differences. I've been fortunate to have several mentors and teachers. In preparing this talk, I've spoken to three who've been somewhat like Yitro to me. One was a teacher at Ramah in 1970 and still one of my closest friends, who was there for me through rocky periods of depression and adolescence and young adulthood. When I reached out last week and said, I need to talk about Yitro, he was there for a 7 a.m. call. Rabbi Joseph Pollack, my Hillel rabbi in the 70s and still a friend, is always available for a Torah question. He expanded my spirituality and caused me to resist divisions among Jews. Rabbi Rachel Martyr is my newest rabbi and teacher, who at half my age offers wisdom and warmth and reminds me that learning never ends. I've had fantasies about Yitro and Moshe. I wish Yitro could advise on a constitution for Israel. And more, that Moshe could come to Bethel, where so many sing in harmony. Shabbat Shalom.